They never asked where I went when I disappeared for hours. They never wondered why I flinched when they raised their voices. They saw the dinners I cooked, the floor I swept, the gifts I gave, but they never saw me. Not the real me. Not the woman who once dreamed of being something more than a servant in her own house. My name was spoken like a habit, not with love. But one day, the silence inside me grew louder than their judgment. And that day, I remembered who I used to be. This story is not just about betrayal. It's about rediscovery, hidden strength, and what happens when the one they thought was weak decides she's had enough. If you enjoy stories filled with suspense, heartbreak, and unforgettable twists, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. My name is Lydia Monroe, but for the last 20 years, I've only been called Mom, Grandma, or sometimes just her. I lived in a house that echoed with other people's demands, never mine. I wasn't bitter, not at first. I used to think love meant giving without keeping score. But over time, the silence grew thick, like dust on furniture no one touched. I used to be a teacher. A good one. Children listened when I spoke, and parents trusted me with their most precious gifts. But that life was folded away like the certificates I boxed up the day I married Douglas. He said he'd take care of me, and I believed him. I believed in everything he said, until he stopped saying anything kind at all. Now, at 71, I spend most mornings sweeping a kitchen I don't dirty, folding clothes I didn't wear, and cooking meals for people who barely look up from their phones. They don't know I once stood on a stage and gave a speech that made my entire school cry. They don't know I once wrote a book. A real one. It's still somewhere in the attic, untouched like me. No one has asked me what I want for my birthday in 15 years. But I remember each of theirs. I remember how Emma liked purple cake when she was 6, how Michael hated frosting, how Douglas once smiled when I surprised him with a new suit for his promotion. That suit was donated 5 years ago. Like my efforts, it was no longer needed. But something happened last week that changed everything. Something so small, yet so sharp, it split my world in half. Emma, my daughter-in-law, looked at me while I was clearing the table and said, "It must be nice to have no responsibilities." No responsibilities. I stood there, holding their dirty dishes, with swollen knees and a back that hasn't straightened in years, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: rage. But I didn't scream. I just smiled and said, "Yes. It must be." They laughed. But that night, I went up to the attic, and I opened the box. I hadn't opened that box in over 30 years. It was pushed into the farthest corner of the attic, behind Douglas's old hunting gear and a suitcase that still had the tag from our honeymoon. Dust clung to everything like memories, cobwebs, undisturbed, forgotten, unwanted. I sat down on the creaky wooden floor, my knees protesting. But my hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. They had done too much, carried too much, to tremble now. Inside the box was a stack of notebooks, journals, and printed pages held together with rubber bands that had long since cracked and crumbled. My manuscript, Whispers from the Riverbed. I wrote it before Michael was born, in a time when my thoughts were still my own, when I believed words could change things. I ran my fingers over the faded title page, by Lydia Monroe. My name, my full name. It felt foreign and familiar all at once. Beneath the manuscript was a photo of me holding my first class of students and a letter from the publishing house that had once shown interest before Douglas told me to focus on family. I remember how he laughed when I brought it up again. "Books don't pay the bills, Lydia. Stop wasting time." So I did. I stopped writing. I stopped dreaming. I stopped existing for myself. But now, I couldn't stop thinking, what if that spark never died? What if it had just been buried? I stayed up the entire night, reading every page I once wrote. And with each paragraph, I saw her again, the woman I used to be. Strong, smart, soft, but never silent. At sunrise, I folded the last page back into the box, pressed both hands to the cover, and whispered, "You waited long enough." Downstairs, I could already hear Emma moving around, complaining about the coffee not being hot and the bread not being sliced thin enough. I smiled. They still thought I was nobody. They had no idea what I was about to do. That morning, I didn't come downstairs right away. I let the kettle whistle a bit too long. I let the toast burn. I let them wait. Lydia, Emma's voice echoed through the hallway. The eggs aren't done, and we're going to be late. I didn't answer. She stormed upstairs, all plastic perfume and entitlement. Her knock wasn't polite, it was a demand. Are you okay? She asked, not because she cared, but because her routine had been interrupted. I opened the door, slowly, and looked her in the eye. I'm writing. Her brow furrowed. Writing what? My story. There was a pause, like the air had hiccuped. Emma tilted her head. What story? I didn't respond. I simply closed the door. Behind it, I could hear her sigh, loud and mocking. I imagined her walking back down and telling Michael, your mother's losing it. But I didn't care. Not anymore. Because something had shifted inside me. For years, I responded to every shout, every insult disguised as a joke, every can you just, and while you're up. I was a ghost who cooked and cleaned. I was always there, always invisible. But today, I didn't answer. And that silence felt like power. I went back to my desk, an old fold-out table in the attic, and opened a fresh notebook. The first line I wrote was not for them. It was for me. This is the story of a woman who forgot she mattered, until she remembered. By afternoon, they had figured out how to toast their own bread. Emma yelled less. Michael didn't even ask why I hadn't made dinner. I think they assumed I was sulking or sick, that I'd snap out of it. But I wasn't sulking. I was building something. Each page I wrote stitched me back together, thread by thread. The woman they forgot was standing up again, quietly, one word at a time. That night, I went to bed without saying goodnight. I didn't turn on the porch light. I didn't fold the laundry they left in the dryer. I didn't exist for them. I existed for me. And for the first time in decades, I slept soundly. Because tomorrow, I'd write more. And someday soon, the world would know my name again. The next morning, I didn't go down at all. I stayed upstairs in the attic, wrapped in my old shawl and the scent of yellowing paper. The sun came through the single dusty window, falling like a spotlight on the stack of handwritten chapters one had already begun to build. I wasn't just rewriting a manuscript. I was rewriting me. Downstairs, I could hear muffled voices, Emma's sharp and irritated, Michael's low and indifferent. Is she okay? She's just being dramatic. Well, she's not cooking. What are we supposed to eat? A few years ago, that would have broken my heart. Now, it confirmed everything I already knew. They didn't love me. They loved what I did for them. It was never about me. Never Lydia, the woman. Just Lydia, the function. But they were going to learn. I stayed up there until noon. No apologies. No explanations. Just silence and my words. Each paragraph I wrote peeled away the years of dismissal, peeled back every insult I swallowed, every moment I bit my tongue when I should have screamed. That afternoon, I went to the post office. I mailed a printed copy of my manuscript to a publishing agency I found online, one that still accepted handwritten drafts from senior authors. I didn't expect a miracle, but I expected something, and that hope alone was already more than I had allowed myself in decades. The clerk asked me if I wanted tracking. No, I said. I want to let it go. When I came home, the house was unusually quiet. Emma was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and gave me a look I knew too well, the passive-aggressive stare of someone who wanted to control me but couldn't figure out how. You okay? She asked. I'm wonderful. That threw her off. I think she expected me to grovel, to apologize for leaving them to feed themselves. Well, you missed breakfast, she said. And I'll probably miss dinner, too. I walked past her, calm as ocean glass. My steps didn't tremble. My shoulders didn't stoop. For the first time in years, I felt taller than her, without raising my voice at all. That night, as I returned to the attic, I paused halfway up the stairs. Something in the air felt different, like the house was holding its breath, waiting. I whispered to myself, let them wonder. Let them wonder where my obedience went. Where the woman who said yes to everything disappeared to, because the truth was simple, she didn't disappear. She finally woke up. It took them 5 days to realize I wasn't going back to the way things were. By then, they had eaten takeout twice, argued 3 times about who would do the laundry, and Emma had burned an entire pot of rice. On the 6th morning, Michael knocked on my door. "Mom?" His voice was soft, too soft. The kind of softness people use when they're confused, not concerned. "Yes," I replied without opening the door. "Is everything okay?" I smiled at the irony. He hadn't asked me that question in years. Not when Douglas yelled at me in front of the children. Not when I limped after slipping on the icy steps last winter. Not even when I forgot my own birthday and he didn't notice. But now that the routine was broken, now he was curious. "I'm fine," I said. "Just busy." "Doing what?" I hesitated, then said with absolute clarity, "Living." He went quiet. I could almost feel him standing there, trying to fit those words into the image of me he had grown used to, silent, predictable, invisible. He didn't knock again. That evening, Emma left a plate of food outside my door. Cold pasta and a forced olive branch. I didn't touch it. Not out of spite. Out of choice. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and reread the chapter 1 wrote that morning. It was the scene where the woman, the main character in my manuscript, who was based more on me than I admitted, stood up in the middle of dinner and walked out of the house without a word. She didn't leave forever. She just made sure they knew they weren't the only ones who mattered. I could hear the television downstairs. Some crime drama blaring over Emma scrolling. They always liked those shows where the villain gets caught in the end. Funny, they never realized the villains in real life don't always scream or steal or cheat. Sometimes they wear smiles. Sometimes they just drain you until you no longer recognize yourself in the mirror. And the victim? She just learns how to survive without applause. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to be free. And I was beginning to realize I didn't need their permission. Not anymore. It rained the next morning. The kind of rain that lingers like memory, steady, patient, impossible to ignore. I stayed in bed a little longer than usual, not out of tiredness, but reflection. I was remembering the sound of my own mother's voice. I hadn't thought of her in years. She used to say, "One day, Lydia, the world will hear you, even if it has to listen through silence." Back then, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I do. I spent most of the day organizing papers, old photographs, and forgotten letters I'd written to myself. Yes, to myself. Letters I never mailed. Letters I wrote during nights when Douglas slammed the door and never said where he was going. Letters I wrote after Michael yelled at me for not pressing his shirts properly, and after Emma made me feel like a housekeeper who was lucky just to be tolerated. I found one that made my hands shake. It was dated exactly 14 years ago. "Dear Lydia, you're still in there. I know it. Even if no one else sees you, I do. You are not just what they take from you. You are what you keep alive inside. Don't let them bury you while you're still breathing." I cried. Not out of sorrow, but because I finally believed those words. I took the letters and tucked them into a new folder, marked, "For after I'm gone." Not because I was dying. No. I was more alive now than I'd been in decades. But because someday, they would need to understand. Someday, when the silence I left behind grows too loud to ignore, they will read every word I wrote and know exactly what they lost. That night, Michael came to my door again. He knocked once, waited, then said, "Emma's planning a big party for the company's 10th anniversary. She wants you to help organize it." A pause. "She says it'd be good for you to feel included." I nearly laughed. Included. As if I hadn't built the foundation under their success. As if I hadn't taken care of everything while they rose higher. as if I hadn't paid for part of that company with my inheritance and never once asked for anything in return. I opened the door. Michael blinked, surprised. Maybe at the look in my eyes. "Tell Emma," I said, "that I'm writing my own legacy now, not managing hers." And then I closed the door. Quietly, firmly. He stood there a while, but I didn't open it again. The attic had become more than a hiding place. It was now my sanctuary, my witness, my war room. That morning, I opened a box I hadn't touched since Douglas died. It was one of the few things I brought with me when I moved in with Michael and Emma back when they insisted I shouldn't be alone, back when I still believed that meant something kind. Inside were files. Folders from our old life. Tax records. Property deeds. Receipts. And then at the very bottom, a red ledger. My breath caught. I remembered this. Douglas used it to track our finances before everything went digital. Before he told me to leave the numbers to the men. Before he stopped asking for my opinion altogether. I opened it, the pages crisp, but yellowed at the edges. And then I saw it. June 12, 2009. Withdrawal from Lydia's inheritance. $80,000, Michael's business startup fund. I blinked. Flipped the page. July 7, 2011. Second withdrawal. $40,000, marked for expansion. There was no mention of my permission. No record of my consent. Just numbers and silence. I stared at the ink until it blurred. My inheritance, what little I had left from my parents, was used to build the company Michael and Emma now celebrated. The same company they claimed I had nothing to do with. The one they built parties around, bragged about, smiled for photographers to represent. And I was never even thanked. Not once. The silence inside me roared. I wasn't angry that they took the money. I was angry that they erased me from the story. They used my past to build their future, and then told me I was just the grandmother with no ambition, the widow who made decent tea and shouldn't complain. I copied the pages, scanned every receipt, and then I started writing again, not fiction this time. No. This was evidence. This was truth. This was the chapter they never thought I'd write. I sat at the tiny attic desk, the red ledger beside me, the photocopies spread out like a quiet rebellion. Every time I looked at those entries, I heard Emma's voice echoing in my memory. "You've never contributed to the business. It's Michael's legacy. His legacy. Funded by my silence." I began writing a formal letter, my handwriting deliberate, my words sharper than they'd ever been spoken aloud. I addressed it to an attorney I once taught in elementary school, who now ran her own firm downtown. Her name was Mariah Reyes. I remembered her as the girl who always stayed after class to help me clean the chalkboard. Kind, brilliant, grateful. I hoped she still was. I enclosed a copy of the ledger pages and a short note. "Mariah, you once told me I was the first adult who believed in your potential. Now I'm hoping you might believe in mine." Enclosed are documents showing that I funded my son's company with personal inheritance funds, uncredited and unauthorized. I would like to discuss what can be done. With warm hope, Lydia Monroe. I sealed the envelope and mailed it before sunrise. Nobody saw me go. Nobody asked where I'd been. And that's exactly how I wanted it. When I returned home, Emma was pacing in the kitchen. "Did you go out?" I smiled. I needed fresh air. She narrowed her eyes. "You should have told someone." I didn't think anyone would care. It landed like a slap, but I watched her pretend it didn't sting. That was her specialty, brushing pain under a rug until it suffocated. That afternoon, I made tea for myself only. No tray of mugs. No sugar laid out like a servant's offering. Just one cup. Mine. The sound of the kettle boiling was louder than it had ever been before. And that night, something curious happened. Michael came to me. Not out of guilt, but discomfort. "Emma says you're acting different," he muttered, standing awkwardly in the hallway. "I suppose I am. Is everything okay?" "No, Michael," I said plainly. "But it will be." He stood there like he didn't know what to say to the woman who had always given, but never pushed back. He wasn't ready for a version of me that no longer bowed. I didn't let him in. I didn't offer a seat. He left, confused. But I wasn't confused anymore. I knew what I wanted. Recognition. Accountability. Freedom. And for the first time, I was walking toward it, not as a mother, or a widow, or a shadow in someone else's home, but as Lydia Monroe. 3 days passed in tense silence. I kept writing during the nights and watching during the days. Not just my family, but myself. I noticed how my voice no longer trembled when I spoke. How I stood straighter, even if my joints ached. How I stopped apologizing for simply existing. Then, on the 4th day, it arrived. A plain envelope, addressed to me in tight cursive, Lydia Monroe. I held it like it might burn through my skin. My hands didn't shake, not from fear. From anticipation. I took it to the attic. My sacred space. My war room. Inside was a typed letter on thick ivory paper. Dear Ms. Monroe, thank you for reaching out. I do remember you, and everything you taught me, from grammar rules to standing up when it matters. Based on the documentation provided, and considering the withdrawal records tied to your name, it appears you have substantial grounds for a legal claim to partial ownership of the company your son currently operates. I would be happy to meet with you privately to discuss the next steps. You are not powerless. Let's talk. Warmly, Mariah Reyes, attorney at law. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because someone finally saw me. Downstairs, laughter rose from the kitchen. Emma's voice rang out, high and artificial. They were entertaining guests, investors maybe. She always hosted like she was auditioning for a richer life. I walked down slowly, letter in hand. Michael looked up. Mom, could you? I raised my hand. Just once. He stopped talking. I looked at Emma and the 2 well-dressed strangers sipping wine at the table. I'll be stepping out tomorrow morning, I said calmly. A legal matter I need to attend to. Emma laughed nervously. Legal? What for? For my stake in Monroe Digital Holdings, I said, placing the letter on the table between the wine glasses. Turns out, my contributions weren't as invisible as you'd hoped. The room went silent. Michael's face drained of color. Emma's mouth hung open like a faulty cabinet. One of the guests raised an eyebrow. I turned to go, but paused at the doorway and said one last thing. I've been quiet a long time, but I never stopped keeping records. I left them staring at the letter, proof that the woman they ignored still had the power to change everything. And I wasn't done yet. The law office was quiet in the way powerful places often are. No shouting, no chaos. Just order, precision, and truth waiting to be named. Mariah met me in the lobby herself. She was taller than I remembered, hair streaked with wisdom, eyes sharp with compassion. When she saw me, she smiled, not the kind people give out of pity, but the kind that says, you were never small. They just couldn't see you clearly. Ms. Monroe, she said, offering her hand, or may I call you Lydia? You may, I replied. It's been a long time since someone asked. She led me into a warm room lined with books, certificates, and quiet strength. We sat across from each other like equals, because now I was one. Mariah opened a folder. I've reviewed everything. The ledger, the withdrawals, the timeline. You have a right to claim equity in the business you helped fund. I nodded. She continued, now you have 2 options. You can take this to court, file an ownership claim, and go through the public process. Or you can issue a private legal notice. Give them a chance to settle. I stared out the window. The sky was gray, but I didn't feel heavy anymore. I felt clear. I don't want to ruin them, I said softly, but I want them to understand the cost of their silence. I want them to feel what it's like to be pushed aside and underestimated. Mariah leaned forward. Then we do this quietly, strategically. You don't need to shout to be heard. I left the office with signed documents in my bag and a newfound steadiness in my step. When I returned home, I didn't sneak in. I walked through the front door with the kind of presence that forced them to look up. Emma was on a video call, curled on the couch like a queen who forgot the throne didn't belong to her. She glanced at me, then did a double take. Michael came from the kitchen. "Mom, where have you been?" "At a law firm," I said. "The one representing me in the ownership claim I filed today." Silence. Real silence. Not the kind they gave me for years, but the kind that hurts. "You? What?" "You used my money. Built your lives on it. Pretended I was just the lady who cleaned up after you," I said. "But I kept the receipts, Michael. I always kept the receipts." Emma stood up. "You wouldn't actually go through with this." "Think about the family I am," I said. "I'm thinking about the family you erased me from." Then I walked past them, one slow step at a time, leaving them to sit in the echo of a truth they never thought would speak. But now I had, and I wasn't finished yet. It didn't take long. By the next morning, Michael had already called twice, left voicemails pretending to be concerned. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was finally theirs to sit with. Emma, on the other hand, took a more direct route. She barged into the attic without knocking. Her voice was sharp, sharper than usual, like a blade that had been waiting too long to strike. "What are you trying to do, Lydia? Humiliate us? Tear this family apart?" I calmly looked up from my notebook. "You can't tear apart something that was never whole." Her lips tightened. "Michael's company is his entire life. You have no idea how hard he's worked." "I do," I interrupted, "because I made it possible." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't deny it. Couldn't. I stood up slowly, and in that moment, I swear the floorboards shifted beneath us. She was taller, younger, louder. But I had something she never would: memory and proof. "You think I'm fragile," I said. "You think I won't go through with it because I've been quiet for so long. But Emma, you've mistaken my stillness for weakness. And that's your biggest mistake." Her eyes flickered. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't shrink under her words. The one who stared back and didn't flinch. "You'll regret this," she said softly, but there was no real conviction in it anymore. I smiled. "I've already regretted staying silent for 30 years. There's nothing worse you can do to me now." She left without slamming the door. That night, I received an email from Mariah. "The legal notice has been delivered to your son's company office. You are now formally recognized as a funding partner with a legal claim to ownership. Let me know when you're ready to take it further." I leaned back in my chair and let the words settle into my bones. For so long, I was told I had nothing. No claim. No voice. No place at the table. Now, they would have to pull up a chair just for me or risk losing everything I helped them build. But I wasn't done just yet. I still had something to say. Not just to them, but to the world. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but purpose. I stayed up reading the final draft of my manuscript, Whispers from the Riverbed, the story of a woman forgotten by the people she loved most. A woman whose silence was mistaken for surrender, until she stood, not with vengeance, but truth. It felt less like fiction now, and more like autobiography. I opened my laptop, an old, sluggish thing Emma nearly threw out last winter, and created a blog. Simple. Quiet. Free. I titled it, "The Years I Spent as Nobody." And I began to write. Not with bitterness. Not with fury. But with facts. With stories. With honesty. I wrote about the late nights spent cleaning while Michael slept soundly upstairs. The birthday dinners I cooked that no one remembered. The savings Douglas used without asking. The inheritance that built their company. The loneliness that lived between the walls of a crowded house. And then I wrote this. They always told me I was lucky to live under their roof. What they never admitted was, without my money, that roof wouldn't exist. I pressed publish. Then I turned off the light and went to sleep with the kind of peace that can't be bought. By morning, the blog had over 1,000 views. By noon, over 10,000. Someone had shared it. Then another. Then someone else commented, "This is my mother's story too." Another wrote, "Thank you for speaking what so many of us are afraid to say." And then, a message came through my inbox from an editor at a publishing platform. She said she wanted to feature my story in a collection about forgotten women reclaiming their voices. She called my writing piercing, timeless, and exactly what the world needs right now. Michael came home early that day. His eyes were wild. "What the hell did you post?" Emma was behind him, pale and silent. "I told the truth," I said, standing in the living room with the laptop still open behind me. "You had your version for years. Now the world gets mine." "You're embarrassing us," he snapped. "People at the office are talking." I stepped closer. "Did it embarrass you when you used my money without asking? Or just now that people know?" His mouth opened, then closed. He had no answer. They thought I would stop at legal papers. They thought I would stay in the attic, quiet and contained. But I had taken the silence they gave me and turned it into a story they couldn't control. And that was just the beginning. By the end of the week, my blog had over 100,000 views. Emails flooded in from women across the country, wives, mothers, grandmothers, each carrying their own version of my silence. They wrote things like, "You told my story, and I thought I was the only one." Some were still trapped in the shadows of their families. Others had escaped and were cheering for me from the other side of the storm. It felt like I had lit a match in a long, dark cave. And the world, it turned out, was filled with women holding torches, just waiting for someone to go first. But not every message brought comfort. One afternoon, while I was preparing to write another post, an email arrived with no subject. It was from someone named Gloria Eastman. The name meant nothing to me until I opened it. "Dear Lydia, I read your story. It moved me, truly. But I have to tell you something, because it involves you more than you realize. I knew your husband, Douglas. He and I worked together at the law firm before he passed. I don't want to upset you, but I think you should know. Douglas didn't just use your money to help your son. He took loans, big ones, in your name, loans you may not know about. And he transferred some of the company shares to Michael long before you moved in with them. There's more, but I think we should speak directly." "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he'd hidden it all from you." I sat frozen. "Loans? In my name? Shares transferred without consent?" The betrayal was no longer just quiet, it was premeditated. The man I had defended for years, the one whose memory I held gently even when he made me feel invisible, had not only dismissed my dreams, but used me like a bank account he didn't have to answer to. I called Mariah immediately. She answered on the first ring. "I just saw the email from Gloria. I was copied on it. Lydia, we may be looking at something deeper than we thought." "How deep?" I asked. "Fraud, possibly embezzlement, identity misuse. And if those shares were transferred improperly, you might have more legal power than even I expected." I hung up, walked to the hallway mirror, and looked at my own reflection, truly looked. I didn't see the woman they used to ignore. I saw someone dangerous now. Someone who had nothing left to lose. Someone they should have never underestimated. Because I was no longer just fighting for acknowledgement. I was fighting to uncover everything they tried to bury with Douglas's smile. The house was unusually quiet the next morning. Emma had stopped her snide comments. Michael walked around me like I was made of glass and gunpowder, afraid to touch, afraid to provoke. They knew the storm had arrived, but they didn't know how deep it would go. That was fine. Because I did. I spent the morning on the phone with Mariah and Gloria. We combed through documents, some dating back nearly 20 years. Douglas had done more than take loans in my name. He had created shell accounts, moved money, hid assets, all while smiling at me from across the dinner table. I had mistaken his silence for detachment. But it was strategy. Calculated. Cruel. But not untraceable. There was one final document we hadn't reviewed yet, Douglas's will. The official copy was held in an attorney's office I had never visited, his old lawyer, not mine. Michael had claimed it was simple, that everything had gone to him, as the only son with nothing of importance to be discussed. I had believed that. Like a fool. Mariah requested the full legal copy under my name as spouse. And when it arrived, she called me to read it aloud. I sat at my attic desk, holding the receiver to my ear, heart pounding. To my wife, Lydia, I leave our shared estate, our accounts, and a secured trust to be released upon her 65th birthday. It is my wish that she never again has to ask anyone for help. I blinked. What trust? I asked. Mariah answered gently. It was never released. It was never even disclosed. Michael, as executor, should have told you 5 years ago. The amount is substantial. How substantial? There was a pause. Just under $400,000. I couldn't breathe for a moment. $400,000 buried. Hidden. Disregarded. Not lost, not spent. Just kept from me, by my own son. Mariah's voice softened. Lydia, we can file a claim against the estate. And if we do this publicly, it will destroy any credibility Michael and Emma have in court. I don't want to destroy them, I whispered. But you do want justice, she said. And she was right. That evening, I called a family meeting, something I hadn't done since Michael was a teenager. They sat at the table, fidgeting, uncertain. I placed the will in front of them. And then, beside it, a printed copy of my latest blog post titled, "The Money They Hid from Me." Michael opened the folder. Emma gasped when she saw the trust amount. I trusted you, I said quietly. Even when you failed me. I gave, and you didn't just ignore me. You erased me. You chose to take what was mine and then let me live like a guest in a house I built. Michael's voice cracked. Mom, I didn't think you'd ever fight back. I finished. I know. And I stood. I will be moving out. Not because I'm unwanted, but because I am finally unbound. And I will be filing for legal control of what was mine all along. Emma started to speak, but I raised a hand. No more lies. No more guilt. You've had years to ask me how I was. You never did. So don't pretend now. I turned away and walked upstairs for the last time. In that moment, I wasn't just taking back my name. I was taking back my future. I packed only what I needed. The rest, photo albums, old linens, kitchen tools I used to love, would stay. I didn't need to carry the weight of a home that never saw me. Let them keep the walls. I had reclaimed what mattered. That morning, I stood at the front door one last time. Emma pretended to be busy in the kitchen, clinking dishes louder than necessary. Michael watched from the stairs, his face a mess of shame and shock. I'm not leaving to punish you, I said, my voice calm. I'm leaving because you don't get to keep me anymore. He tried to speak. But I held up the house key, the one I had carried like a badge of worth, and placed it on the entry table. Then I walked out. The air outside felt different, like it had been waiting for me. I moved into a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, just sunlight through tall windows, bookshelves, and peace. The silence here was mine, not given to me as punishment. And within days, something remarkable happened. A journalist reached out. She had read my blog and wanted to feature my story in a national magazine's Women of Worth series. I said yes, not for fame, but for truth. She came with a photographer, a notepad, and questions no one in my family ever asked. What made you stop accepting silence? What was the moment you realized you deserved more? What would you say to women still waiting to be seen? My answers were raw, simple, real. By the following week, the article was published under the headline, "The Woman They Forgot: How Lydia Monroe Reclaimed Everything They Took." It spread like wildfire. Emails poured in. Letters. Calls from women saying, I left too. I'm finally speaking up. You reminded me I'm not just someone's mother or wife. I'm me. One morning, I received a handwritten card from a woman in her 70s. I thought I was too old to start again. Then I read your story. Now I'm starting anyway. Thank you. I cried reading it. Not out of sorrow, but recognition. For decades, I had whispered into voids, hoping someone would hear me. Now the whole world was listening. And Michael? He tried calling. So did Emma. Messages filled my inbox, alternating between apologies and pleading. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I wasn't here to fix them. I was here to finish myself. It came in a cream-colored envelope, tucked neatly between utility bills and catalogs. For a moment, I nearly missed it, nearly let it slip into the pile of things I used to ignore. But the weight of it made me pause. Inside was a letter on thick, embossed paper. The logo was simple, elegant. The Women's Voice Foundation. A name I had heard before, whispered during interviews and mentioned on the news. They fought for women's rights, for recognition, for justice where it had long been denied. And now, they wanted me. Dear Ms. Monroe, your story has reached our board and deeply moved us. We believe your journey represents thousands of silent sacrifices that never make headlines. We would be honored if you would join us as a keynote speaker at our National Assembly this fall. Your voice matters, and the world is finally ready to hear it. With admiration, Asha Delaney, Director, Women's Voice Foundation. I reread the letter 5 times. Me? The woman who once couldn't raise her voice at a dinner table was now being asked to stand before hundreds, maybe thousands. Not to beg, not to explain, but to inspire. I called Mariah. She was breathless with joy. Lydia, this is huge. You could use this platform to push your case further, go beyond your family, go global. But I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about impact. I accepted the invitation. I spent the next weeks writing my speech by the window, just as the autumn leaves began to fall. I crafted every word not from rage, but from remembrance. Of who I was, of what I survived, of what I had rebuilt with my own quiet hands. On the night of the event, I stood backstage in a simple blue dress. No pearls, no heels, just truth. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage and looked out over the crowd. I saw women holding each other's hands, daughters looking toward their mothers with admiration, strangers waiting to hear what I had to say. I took a deep breath and began. For many years, I lived in a house where my name was only used when they needed something. I was not a woman. I was a utility. I was background noise in their symphony of ambition. But what they didn't know was that I was listening, and I was remembering, and I was preparing to speak. And now here I am, not as their mother, not as their afterthought, but as Lydia Monroe. And I am done being quiet. The applause was thunderous. I felt it in my bones. I felt seen. A week after the speech, I was still receiving letters. Some from women who had just left their marriages. Others from granddaughters reading my blog to their grandmothers in nursing homes. They called me brave. They called me a warrior. But the truth was, I had simply run out of ways to stay small. Then, one letter arrived that changed everything all over again. It was handwritten, addressed in delicate cursive, the kind that had gone out of fashion decades ago. No return address. Inside was a single folded page. Lydia, you don't know me, but I knew your mother. My name is Ruth Carrington. We met in 1954, when you were just a baby. Your mother, Ellen, was brilliant, sharp, creative, always ahead of her time. Before she passed, she left something behind for you. A manuscript. A collection of essays, letters, and journal entries. She told me someday, when my Lydia finds her voice, she'll need to know where it came from. I kept it safe all these years. I didn't know when or if you would ever come looking, but after reading your article in the magazine, I knew it was time. Please let me send it to you. It belongs to you, just like your voice always did. With love, Ruth. I sat there stunned, the letter trembling in my hands. All my life, I thought my mother died with her secrets buried. But now, even from the grave, she had reached out to remind me that this strength wasn't new. It was inherited. It was in my bones. The next day, Ruth sent the package. Inside was a worn leather binder, tied with a ribbon so old it nearly disintegrated in my fingers. On the first page, in my mother's handwriting, to Lydia, one day they will try to take your voice. But you are my daughter. And I know they will never keep it. The essays inside were breathtaking, essays about womanhood, sacrifice, and power buried under silence. They read like my life, as if she'd seen everything I would go through before I even lived it. I wept for hours, not from grief, but from the overwhelming realization that I had never been alone. I decided to publish her work alongside mine. 2 generations of silenced women, speaking in chorus, finally heard. And then I changed the title of my upcoming book from Whispers from the Riverbed to something far more honest. The Women They Tried to Bury. And I made sure both names were on the cover, Lydia Monroe and Ellen Carrington, mother and daughter. Silence and storm, legacy and truth. It was a rainy Thursday when I opened the door and saw Michael standing in the hallway of my apartment building. He looked older. Not in the way that time ages a person, but in the way guilt does. His shoulders were slouched, his tie loose, like he hadn't slept in days. "I saw the book," he said softly. He held a copy of The Women They Tried to Bury in his hands. My name, my mother's. Our stories, side by side, wrapped in truth they had spent years pretending didn't exist. I didn't speak. I stepped aside, letting him in not because I had forgiven him, but because I was ready to hear the apology I once stopped dreaming of. He sat on the edge of the couch like it might reject him. "I read every word," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't know. About Grandma. About what Dad did. About how much I took from you." I studied him. My son. The boy I raised. The man who had inherited more than money. He had inherited the belief that power means silence for someone else. He was learning now. Late, but learning. "I believed what I wanted to believe," he continued. "That you were happy just being there. That taking charge of everything made me a good son. But I see it now. I see how small we made you feel." I sat across from him, the silence between us thick but not cruel. "You didn't just make me feel small, Michael," I said gently. "You made me invisible. And it wasn't your ignorance that hurt me. It was your choice to stay ignorant." He nodded slowly, as if each word pierced something inside him. "I lost your trust," he whispered. "And I don't expect to earn it back. But I wanted you to know. I'm ashamed. And I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect. But it was real." He stood to leave, placing the book on my table. "I hope the world listens to you now," he said. "I hope they never stop." I followed him to the door, placing my hand on the frame before he walked out. "I wanted you to be proud of me," I said. "But I stopped needing that the day I became proud of myself." He nodded once. Then he left. And I stood there, holding the silence in my hands, not heavy anymore, but light. Liberating. Because I didn't need his approval. I had the truth. I had my mother's words. And now I had the world listening. A month after the book launched, my inbox was no longer just filled with praise, it was filled with requests. Requests to speak, to teach, to lead. A women's college in Boston asked if I would consider being their guest in residence for a semester. A publishing house wanted me to curate a series of memoirs from older women who'd never told their stories. Even a major documentary producer asked to adapt my blog into a series called Silent No More. At 71, I had become what I never dreamed I'd be, a woman with a platform and a voice that others leaned in to hear. But the most meaningful message came from a place I'd once left behind. A small community center in the very neighborhood where Douglas and I raised Michael. The same place where I once taught children their first letters, their first poems. It had changed since then. Grown, diversified. And now it had a new mission. "Dear Ms. Monroe, we have followed your story with deep admiration. We would be honored if you'd allow us to rename our literacy and empowerment program after you. It will be called the Lydia Monroe Center for Women's Voices. Because what you've done, what you've survived, has made it possible for so many others to speak. With respect and hope, Carla Nguyen, director." I cried reading it. Not tears of sorrow, but of arrival. All those nights in the attic. All those unspoken words. All those years of folding laundry and swallowing truths. They had not disappeared. They had grown roots beneath the silence. And now, they were blooming. At the center's grand opening, I stood in front of a new generation, young women, older women, even a few men, gathered to hear me speak, not because they pitied me, but because they believed me. And I told them this. They tried to define me by what I gave, but they never asked what I lost. And now, with every word I write, every woman I meet, every silence I break, I take back a piece of myself. And I offer it to you. Because this story, it was never just mine. It was always ours. The applause echoed, but I wasn't listening to them. I was listening to the girl I once was, the woman I became, and the mother I now honored every day through truth. The house I left behind hadn't crumbled, but it no longer held me hostage because I had built something better. A home made of voices, of pages, of lives rewritten. It was a quiet evening, no applause, no headlines, no meetings. Just a soft breeze through the curtains and the warm comfort of solitude that wasn't lonely. I sat at my desk with a blank page in front of me. Not for an editor. Not for a speech. Not for the world. For her. The woman I used to be. The one who whispered when she wanted to scream. Who said yes when she meant no. Who served everyone a full plate while her own soul starved. And I began to write. Dear Lydia, I remember you. I remember the way you smiled through pain because you thought that was what love required. I remember the nights you stood in the kitchen, washing dishes no one thanked you for, holding in tears you didn't feel allowed to cry. I remember how you waited, year after year, for someone to see you, to hear you, to ask how your day was, not what you could do for theirs. You carried everyone, but no one carried you. And yet, you never gave up. You didn't know it, but inside you, a quiet strength was growing, waiting. And one day, when it was time, you stopped shrinking. You spoke. You fought. You became the woman you were always meant to be, not just a mother, not just a wife, not just a helper in someone else's story. You became the author of your own. And now, people listen. Now, girls whisper your name with hope. Now, other women stand because you did first. You are not lost. You are not wasted. You are not too late. You are loved. Especially by me. Lydia, I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box with the others I had written over the years. Some were cries for help. Others were dreams never spoken aloud. But this was closure. And rebirth. As I turned off the light and looked around my small apartment, I felt something deep and still inside me. Not pride, not power, peace. Because I had lived the years they tried to erase. And in the end, I hadn't just survived. I had risen. The end. The years I spent as nobody concludes here with a story that started in silence, bloomed in truth, and ended in freedom.